hum of fluorescent lights, the steady rhythm of heart monitors, and the distant echo of hurried footsteps. These are the sounds that fill the air in an emergency room long after midnight. For most, the ER is a place of urgency and hope, where lives hang in the balance, and every second counts. But for those who work the night shift, there's another side to this world, a side that flickers just beyond the reach of reason, where the line between life and death blurs, and something else sometimes slips through. Nurses are the silent sentinels of this realm, moving from bed to bed with practiced calm, their faces betraying little of the chaos they witness. They see humanity at its rawest: pain, fear, relief, and sometimes the unexplainable. It's a job that demands resilience, compassion, and nerves of steel. Yet even the most seasoned nurses will tell you there are nights when the rules of medicine no longer apply, when the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the familiar turns strange. Tonight, we step into that world. These are 5 true stories, whispered in break rooms and remembered in the quiet hours before dawn. Stories from ER nurses who have seen things that defy logic, stories that linger long after the shift ends, stories that remind us, not everything that enters the ER is entirely human. Sarah had always prided herself on her composure. 15 years in Chicago's busiest trauma center had taught her to expect the unexpected, to keep her voice steady even as chaos erupted around her. But nothing in her training prepared her for the night the old woman arrived. It was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, the city outside blanketed in ice and silence. The ER was unusually quiet, the usual parade of accidents and emergencies slowed by the weather. At 3 a.m., the automatic doors slid open, and paramedics wheeled in an elderly woman bundled in a thin hospital gown, her bare feet blue with cold. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and her lips curled into a gentle, unsettling smile. Sarah wrapped her in warm blankets, checked her vitals, and tried to coax her into conversation. The woman's skin was icy, her core temperature dangerously low, but she didn't shiver. Instead, she stared at Sarah and whispered, "They're coming to get the others." Over and over, her voice soft and sing-song, as if reciting a nursery rhyme. At first, Sarah chalked it up to hypothermia-induced confusion, but as the hours crept by, something strange began to happen. Patients in nearby beds, some recovering from surgery, others waiting for test results, started slipping into deep, inexplicable comas. Monitors beeped in alarm, doctors rushed from room to room, but no one could find a cause. By sunrise, 8 patients were unresponsive, their breathing shallow, their faces peaceful as if lost in a dream. Sarah checked on the old woman, but her bed was empty. Panic surged through her as she searched the halls, but it was as if the woman had vanished into thin air. Security was called, and the staff pored over the night's footage, only to find every recording from that wing corrupted, static and flickering shadows, nothing more. 3 days later, the coma patients awoke, confused and frightened. None remembered what had happened, but each described the same recurring nightmare. An old woman, her smile gentle and cold, moving silently from bed to bed, collecting souls in her arms. Sarah never saw the woman again, but sometimes on the coldest nights, she swears she hears that sing-song voice echoing down the empty corridors. Hundreds of miles away, in a small-town hospital in Maine, Jennifer was finishing up paperwork when the doors burst open and a young boy was rushed in, his skin blistered and raw. He was barely conscious, his breaths ragged, and his mother sobbed as she explained he'd fallen into a bonfire. But when Jennifer asked what happened, the boy's eyes filled with terror. "My sister pushed me," he whispered. Jennifer's heart ached for him, but the story didn't add up. The boy's sister had died in a house fire 2 years earlier, a tragedy the whole town remembered. As Jennifer cleaned his wounds, she noticed something odd. When she turned away, the burns seemed to fade, the angry red skin smoothing over as if healing in fast forward. But when she looked back, the injuries would reappear, sometimes worse than before. The boy grew quieter as the night wore on, his gaze fixed on the far corner of the room. Jennifer caught him murmuring to someone she couldn't see, his voice low and urgent. "I'm sorry. Please don't be mad. I didn't mean to leave you." The hair on the back of her neck stood up, and she felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. The night before his scheduled discharge, Jennifer checked on him one last time. He was sitting up, eyes wide, speaking softly to the empty space. "I'll go with you," he said. "Just don't hurt Mom." Jennifer tried to comfort him, but he barely seemed to notice her presence. The next morning, his bed was empty. The sheets were covered in fine gray ash, and the air smelled faintly of smoke. Security footage showed the boy walking down the hallway, hand in hand with a girl who looked exactly like his deceased sister, her hair singed, her dress charred at the edges, but her face serene. They disappeared around a corner, and no one ever saw them again. Jennifer still dreams of that night, of the boy's pleading eyes, and the way the shadows seemed to flicker and dance in the corners of the room. She keeps a small charm in her pocket now, a gift from the boy's mother, and whispers a prayer every time she walks past the pediatric ward. Mark had always considered himself a skeptic. Working in a Los Angeles ER, he'd seen enough to know that most so-called supernatural events had rational explanations. But one night, a car crash victim changed everything. The man was wheeled in, blood pooling beneath his head, his pulse fading. The trauma team worked frantically, but after 20 minutes, the doctor called time of death. Mark was preparing the paperwork when the man suddenly gasped, his eyes snapping open. He sat up, his voice booming in perfect archaic Latin, a language Mark recognized from his college days, but one the patient had never studied. The words chilled the room, detailed, vivid predictions of how each person present would die. The nurse with the red hair would drown in her own bathtub. The doctor would be struck by lightning on a clear day. Mark himself would die at 3:33 a.m., alone in his apartment, heart stopped by fear. The team laughed it off, but the atmosphere in the room shifted. 3 months later, the nurse with the red hair was found in her apartment, the victim of a freak accident. The details matched the prediction exactly. Mark quit his job the next day, unable to shake the feeling that something had followed him home. Every night since, he wakes at 3:33 a.m., heart pounding, listening for footsteps in the dark. Rachel's story unfolded on a quiet night in Phoenix, the kind of shift where time seems to stretch and the world outside feels impossibly far away. An old man was admitted, his mind clouded by advanced dementia. He barely spoke, but his hands were never still. He spent hours drawing the same intricate symbol on his bed sheets, over and over, a looping complex pattern that seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. Curious, Rachel snapped a photo and later discovered the symbol was an ancient sigil, used in rituals to summon the dead. That night, the temperature in the ward plummeted, and a strange hush fell over the hospital. Nurses whispered of seeing familiar faces in the halls, patients who had died in the past week, their eyes empty, their movements slow and deliberate. Rachel tried to dismiss it as exhaustion, but the fear in her colleagues' eyes was real. Security cameras showed nothing unusual, but dozens of staff reported the same sightings. In the chaos, the old man vanished, leaving behind only his bedsheets covered in symbols, and a room so cold it took 3 days to warm up again. Rachel still keeps the photo on her phone, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved. She avoids that wing of the hospital now, especially at night, and sometimes catches herself tracing the symbol absent-mindedly, as if it's burned into her memory. Michael's story is perhaps the most unsettling of all. He worked nights at Detroit's largest hospital, a place where tragedy and hope collided every hour. One evening, a teenage girl was brought in after a failed suicide attempt. She was quiet, withdrawn, her eyes darting to every reflective surface in the room. As Michael treated her, he noticed something impossible. The girl cast no reflection in the mirror above the sink, nor in the window beside her bed. When he asked her about it, she hesitated, then whispered, "I made a deal 2 weeks ago. I wanted something so badly, I didn't care about the cost. It took my reflection in exchange for my wish. But now it wants more. It's coming for me." Each night, Michael checked on her, and each night, the reflections in her room grew stranger. At first, it was just a shadow, a flicker at the edge of the glass, but soon a dark figure appeared, its features twisted and inhuman, inching closer with every passing hour. On the 7th night, a scream shattered the silence. Michael raced to her room, but she was gone. The only trace was a smear on the window, as if something had been dragged through the glass. Security footage showed the girl being pulled into the window by a figure that looked exactly like her, except for the smile, stretched impossibly wide, eyes black as midnight. Michael transferred to another hospital soon after, but he never forgot the girl's final words. "Don't look in the mirror after midnight. You might not like what looks back." These stories are whispered among night shift staff, shared in hushed tones during the slow hours before dawn. They are reminders that, in the world of medicine, not every mystery can be solved, and not every patient can be saved from what haunts them. For every life saved, there are questions left unanswered, shadows that linger long after the lights come back on. After nights like these, the ER feels forever changed. Nurses share knowing glances, haunted by what they've seen. So if you're ever in an ER at night and notice a nurse watching the shadows, remember, they're not just caring for patients, but guarding the fragile boundary between life and the unknown.